Penguin Random House Audio presents The Poetry Remedy, Prescriptions for the Heart, Mind and Soul by William Sieghart.
To Felicity Sieghart, in her 92nd year. With thanks to Evie Pritchard, my helper in this project, who will one day have many books to her name, and whose part in this book has been extraordinary. To Jenny Dyson, who created the Poetry Pharmacy in the first place. To Elizabeth Shinkman, my agent, who conceived the book and made it happen. To my editor, Donald Footers, and to everyone at Penguin for their wonderful contribution. To Susanna Herbert, Jane Davis, Neil Astley, Jeanette Winterson, and all the anthologists who helped me in my selection. Introduction. You don't need to be a poet to find solace in poetry. I was 8 years old when I was first sent to boarding school, and I was desperately unhappy. At a time when friends were in short supply, I found that poetry became my friend. Reading it aloud was the only thing I was good at. I even won a prize or two doing it. That, I think, began my whole relationship with poetry. Since then, these careful crystallizations of feeling, thought, and experience have been a loyal and generous companion to me, even in the most difficult of times. Again and again, in my loneliest hours, and in my most tumultuous, I have discovered the greatest solace in finding, reading, and sometimes memorizing the perfect poem for the moment. As a young adult, I was about to cross a road in London when the lights changed. A man standing next to me stepped out into the path of a car and was immediately run down. The suddenness of it all was incredible. The next thing I knew, he was lying on the road unconscious. Somebody from the crowd was giving him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and had asked for my help pummeling the poor man's heart back into life. He was lucky. By some incredible fluke, an ambulance was there in a matter of minutes. The man's heart started beating again. The police took my statement, and off he sped, leaving me standing uselessly on the same street corner with the traffic flowing by. Life went on as it had before. The only evidence of this extraordinary drama was my hands, still covered with blood. As I slowly got my breath back, I remembered a poem I'd learnt of Philip Larkin's. It's called Ambulances, and it's about the drama and anguish we go through when situations like this arise. How seeing an ambulance brings the dread we feel about the future into greater focus, and dulls to distance all we are. Between these apt words and the strong drink I immediately sought out, I was helped to process what had been a bizarre, unexpected, and very shaking 2 hours. That particular poem didn't make it into this book, in the end, but what it did for me in that moment points to something much more universal. Like that isolated 8-year-old, or that quaking young man, a great many of us turn to poetry in times of need. Above all, when we're grieving, when we're broken-hearted, and when we find ourselves struggling to understand the things we're feeling. We long for the connection poetry can provide. To find the right poem at that crucial moment, one capable of expressing our situation with considerably more elegance than we can ourselves, is to discover a powerful sense of complicity, and that precious realization, I'm not the only one who feels like this. In the words of Alan Bennett, the best moments in reading are when you come across something, a thought, a feeling, a way of looking at things, which you'd thought special and particular to you. Now here it is, set down by someone else, a person you have never met, someone even who is long dead, and it is as if a hand has come out and taken yours. The problem is shared. More than that, very often it is transformed. The poet has made what you're going through seem more intriguing, more timeless, and more valid in some way, and that can be a great comfort. The distance afforded by seeing one's own emotions formalized and made beautiful combines with the visceral connection one feels with this poet, this stranger, who understands. And what results is a sort of peace. This idea that there can be a therapeutic power to a poem is at the heart of the poetry remedy. But that therapeutic power only exists if you can find the right poem for the right state of mind. This book aims to help by gathering poems which I know from experience will help people through most conceivable difficulties of day-to-day life, through the various phases and frustrations of love, grief, work, and all the other concerns that dominate our thoughts. There isn't a singular poem for anything, just as there is no singular human response to an emotion. The first breath of love is very different from the last anguished cries of loss. Love has many moods and many stages, just as do regret and life and solitude. However momentary or enduring it might be, my hope is that you will find a poem within this book that fits your need. The history of the poetry pharmacy. I've always believed in the power of poetry to explain people to themselves. In this volume is a poem by Stuart Henson called The Price. It's the kind of poem that has enormous impact and power, especially when encountered unexpectedly. More than 20 years ago now, I used to post it round London at the height of the windows in the double-decker buses. I'd put it underneath bridges where I knew buses would have to come to a halt at traffic. It was almost a guerrilla tactic, confronting people with a poem that I knew would startle them, but that I was also confident might help them in some way. Although I didn't think of it that way at the time, that may well have been the first incarnation of the poetry pharmacy. The pharmacy proper began much later, while I was being interviewed at a literary festival in Cornwall, England, about a more traditional anthology I'd just brought out. A friend of mine, Jenny Dyson, had the idea of allowing me to prescribe poems from that book to audience members after the talk. She set me up in a tent with 2 armchairs and a prescription pad. It turned out to be all I needed. The hour we had originally planned for came and went, and then a second, and a third, until many hours later I was still in there, with queues of people still waiting for their appointments. I realized that we were onto something. Suffering is the access point to poetry for a lot of people. That's when they open their ears, hearts and minds. Being there with the right words for someone in that moment, when something's happened, when they're in need, is a great comfort, and sometimes creates a love of poetry that can last a lifetime. After Cornwall, I brought the Poetry Pharmacy to BBC Radio 4. I was asked back to do it again at Christmas, one of the most stressful times of year, as we all know, and then on to BBC Television, and into the pages of the Guardian newspaper. Meanwhile, I never stopped doing my personal consultations. I toured the country, offering poetry pharmacies in libraries and festivals. In all of this, I learned how much most people's heartaches have in common. The objects and their circumstances might change, but there's nothing like listening to people's problems in leafy Kensington and then a council estate in Liverpool for making you realize the basic spiritual sameness that runs throughout humanity. I must have listened over the last few years to nearly 1,000 people's problems. This book is therefore a compilation of the prescriptions that work for 56 of the problems that really matter. I found that some of my prescriptions, such as one of the Hafez poems you'll hear me read, so inspire people that they seem to leave their chair a foot taller than when they sat down. Seeing the difference the right poem can make written on that many faces has given me confidence in poetry's power to change lives. How to read a poem. People are always telling me that they worry about their ability to read a poem. They don't really know how to. It's almost as though when they're faced with a poem, they're instantly intimidated, even though of course they can read and write like the best of us. When I'm asked for tips, I always give the same advice. Don't
Sample complete. Ready to continue?